Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use nested components like parent component and a child component, and how to pass data from your parent to the child, and also how to get events from your child to the parent. So we're going to make use of input and output from Angular and going to demo how to make this work. So if you look at this website, what we are going to do is when you hover on a particular cosine, I'm going to invoke a particular API and receive all the information of that particular cosine. So under this Italian cosine, whatever food items are there, they're going to be retrieved and they're going to display it in one component. That component, we will use it inside the cosine components. So cosine component is a parent. The food items for that particular cosine will be the child component. And if you look at this, when you hover on any of these food items, right, you can see the data changing here, and it also tells you from which cosine it is. You can see that we're going to use that logic as well. Now come, without delay, let's get started. Okay, now I'm going to create a component called food items. So for that, ng generate component food items. Looks, there was a spelling mistake. I'm going to delete that and create a proper name. Okay, it is getting generated. Alright, great, got generated. Let's delete the one which we don't want. So we deleted this. We have to go here and remove that manually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the food items, and then here what we are going to do is we are going to make use of a property called cosine ID. CUISINE cosine ID. I wanted to know which cosine has been hovered, the mouse hovered by the user or selected by the user. So this is a cosine ID, and it's of type number. Great. Now what we are going to do is we are going to decorate this with the attribute called input. Let's bring in the namespace. Okay, format the code. Right, the moment you declare input for a particular property, which means you can pass some data to this property from another component. Now what I'm going to quickly do is, based out of this API, I'm going to create some models, and I'm going to create the services for the categories, and I'm going to create some services for the food menus. And once I have all those things ready, which you can watch now, once everything is ready, we will see how to make use of this. So basically what I've done is I created a couple of models based out of the APIs that I have, and like categories, the food items, the food menu, right? And then I also created a couple of services for categories, separate service, food menu services separately. And if you look at the food menu services, the small difference that you can see from the previous clip is I am taking this API URL from the environment variable. So where do you find this environment variable? Environment variable can be found here. These variables are used based on your build location. So if you're building this application for different environments like dev, QA, staging, production, there will be 4 different files for all those environment, and based on what each environment has value, those will be dynamically present in the build. In our case, this is a simple application. What I've done is I've come to the core and added a model called interface environment configuration interface. Here I have a couple of properties, API URL, endpoint names, and other things, and I'm making use of that under my environment variable here. So this will force me to implement each property of this interface, which is nothing but these properties, right? So if you see, this is my API URL and these are the controller's action methods, the final endpoint. So I'm going to format these two in the services here. If you look at here, it's going to call the particular API by formatting the URL like this. That is what I've done. You can go through this code. It is very simple. Whatever we did in cosine services is what we have done it in other services as well. So now let's take a moment. If you look at this particular API, if you pass the cosine ID, let's say the cosine ID is 1, which is Italian, I believe, and if you pass this endpoint will return all the data, all the food items for particular cosine, right? You can see all this details. So what we are going to do is we're going to call this API, pass this data dynamically and get all the data back, and we are going to display these food items here. That is what we're going to do. Now that's the completed app, and this is the app that I'm building for you. Now let's take a moment. What we're going to do is we created a component called food items, right? So if you come to food items here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some numbers randomly for now. Okay, so I'm saying it's 1, which is the default cosine ID, and then I'm going to paste a piece of code and explain you what it is. So basically what we're doing is we're going to add all the missing properties. All right, so basically I have a couple of things like food menu arrays, the category arrays, and I'm injecting the category service, the food menu service. We don't need router for now. So we have injected and we have used a couple of things. We have injected 2 services and we have 2-3 methods. So what these methods are doing is, one method is calling a food menu service and invoking all the data based on the cosine ID. The other one is simply retrieving all the categories. That's a separate API. If you look at here, this is the one that I'm using, get categories all. In one of my video I showed you how lifecycle hooks works. So here we are going to use 2 lifecycle hooks. One is the ng on init and the other one is ng on changes. So ng on changes is the first lifecycle hook that gets triggered and will always triggers whenever there is a input changes happens. In our case the input is cosine ID. So in this component what we are doing is when a particular so we are doing is, let's do this. So in this component what we will do is we'll go and invoke our services manually for a particular cosine ID, which is cosine ID 1. So in order to see the output, what I will do is I will take this component selector, which is nothing but the food items. I'll go to the cosine service and use the component here. And if we go to this demo, you see some items, this nested component started displaying, right? This is the parent component when we have another component that's called nested component. We're going to bring in all the data here. I have a simple HTML code which I'm going to copy paste. If you see what this code is doing is we are triggering the one cosine ID here and it is by default calling all the data, right? And even if you hover on it, this data is not going to change because we literally hard coded this, right? We hard coded this as 2, then the second cosine ID is sent and that data will be displayed. You see this, but if you hover on it, it's nothing is going to happen. So this is what we are going to achieve. When you hover on it, we're going to pass this data to this component, the child component, and then the child component will then trigger the particular cosine ID. So in order to make use of this, we have to access that property from this location. So you need to access that property using the square bracket, and then you can pass the ID of it. So here the selected cosine is the one that holds the current selected item. So if we say selected cosine.id. This id will be passed. What we are going to do is we are going to go to that component and then we will remove the default value, which is 2. So once I remove the default value, it's going to accept that. It's going to get sent. So if I hover this, there's no data change, right? So the reason why it is not happening is the change detection will happen in one of the lifecycle hook, which is ng on change. So basically we need to put this into the ng on change, not on the ng on init. So once we apply that logic here, you can see the second one is triggered. If I hover on it, the third call is triggered. And you can see when I hover on Chinese, the Chinese related food items are coming. Hover on this one, differents are coming, right? All the different items are coming based on what you're hovering on it. That's how the change detection happens. You would have seen this in the lifecycle hook video. You can uncomment this to see how the changes are done. What is the previous value of this cosine ID and what is the present value of this cosine ID. Alright, so now what we have to do is there's something called output attribute. If you use the output attribute, you can communicate something from your child component to your parent component. That is what we are going to see next. Now we will have a public property called on hover food item. So public on hover food item is the name, and which is of type new event emitter, and here we are going to emit a food item which was selected. So we need to mark this property with an attribute called output. So at the rate output. So this is showing error because we have a incorrect namespace. So let's bring in the right namespace. So event emitter from angler.core. Okay, so we have this output public property on hover food item, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to intimate to our caller and emit a particular food item whichever was selected. Okay, so basically when I hover on this samosa or tandoori chicken, I wanted to emit this information that tandoori chicken, which is nothing but a food menu item, has been hovered on it. So in order to do that, I need a method called on item hover. So what this method is doing is, so this method is going to emit the food item based on you hover it. So we need to call this method from our HTML element. So let's come to the HTML element. What we are going to do is whenever you hover on this item, I'm going to put a mouse over event and say I pass on this item to this method. So now what will happen? This method is called and this item is emitted. So how do we make use of this? So now, like I said, the input property, you need to use it in the consuming application. So in this, the component whichever is used here, you can pass a content into an input variable by using a square bracket. Similarly, whenever you use this component, if you have to use the output component, you need to use that in the parenthesis. So in our case, it is on hover food item. So if I go here to this cosine component and come to the child component, I'll open the bracket, I'll open the parenthesis and put on hover food item, and I'll call it as a name. I will call this as a name and then pass on an event. So once you pass an event, you need to have the same method into the cosine component. So let's put in that method. So let's have that method here. I have a method and I have a food menu, which is nothing but the input type. So I'll bring in the namespace and I'm going to make use of a food menu hovered property, and that is of type food menu. Great. So now this one will tell you what was hovered at that point of time, right? So if I come here quickly, what I can do is I can quickly paste a piece of code. Let's say I'm hovering on this, so I want to display what was hovered. Okay, there's something wrong. So I need to put this mouse hover here. So I have it placed properly. So if I come to the cosine model, now whenever I hover on it, you see this, the data is emitted and I'm displaying the data here. So it basically displays the name of the content and its description based out of his category. Right, so the selected cosine has the name of the cosine that is selected. In this case it's Chinese, and if I hover on it, it clearly says tandoori chicken is from Chinese cosine, and this says bread is from Italian cosine. Indian cosine, you can see the similar one. Thai cosine, you can see special cake from Thai cosine. Great. So in this video we saw how to create component, how to create nested components, how to pass data from your parent to the child, and also emit something or intimate what was selected or what happened from your child component to your parent component. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you. In next clip we will talk about routing and how to navigate to different routings. Thanks for watching. If you like my video, don't forget to subscribe my channel, like it, share it, comment it, and never forget to click on the bell icon.